sick and spreading germs to others. So be wise and wash your hands regularly to keep those germs at bay. Get more tips for healthy living by tuning in to Kaieteur Radio every Monday at 1:05 p.m. for Your Health Matters.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Your Health Matters here on Kaieteur Radio. I'm your host, Rehanna Ramsay, and today we will be talking about tobacco companies and how they have introduced a new generation to smoking. Just before we go into our program, let me just tell you a little bit about some of the new devices and methods that they have been using to push smoking to a new generation. While the dangers of smoking is widely known, and countries like ours have formulated laws to help to safeguard the public's health against the effects of smoking, tobacco companies have made it a point to find new ways to continue to push their products, influencing a new generation down a dangerous path. Through the introduction of a host of methods and new devices, tobacco companies have successfully veiled a new generation into thinking that it's less dangerous to smoke. These companies have found ways in to make smoking look quote unquote cool by offering a wide range of products to promote the unhealthy practice. Products like e-cigarettes, hookah, and vape pens encourage persons to engage in smoking without telling them how much damage it does to their body. The big question is, are they really less harmful than traditional cigarettes? Today, Dr. Shaliza Gopi, a technical officer for the Tobacco Control Unit at the Ministry of Health, is here with us, and she will give us some insight on what these types of smoking with these types of methods can do to you. Good afternoon, Dr. Gopi, and welcome to the program.
Yes, Rehanna, thank you for having me.
Okay, so for those joining us on Facebook and Kaieteur Radio, I encourage you to let your friends tune in because I'm sure they will find some information here that will be impactful and helpful to them. So Dr. Gopi, let's get into our discussion. You are working with the NCD unit. Just tell us a little bit about yourself before we just go into our discussion.
Okay, so I'm Shaliza Gopi. I am a physician by training, and I'm currently working as the technical officer for tobacco control within the Chronic Diseases Unit, Ministry of Health.
Okay. And tell us, just give us an overview, because we all know that smoking is dangerous, but tell us why, just remind our viewers why they should stay away from this harmful practice.
Right, so smoking leads to disease and disability, and it harms nearly every organ of the body. It basically reduces your overall health. It can cause cardiovascular diseases such as heart attack, heart failure. It can lead to many different cancers. And even if you smoke just one cigarette a day, it can have serious health consequences. So a recent research was done, and it actually found that smoking just one cigarette has about 50% chance of 50% risk of coronary heart disease and stroke compared to 20 cigarettes a day.
Wow. And we know that there are different types now, because smoking, you don't get just tobacco, the normal cigarettes. You have, first there was chewing of tobacco and smoking cigarettes and just cigars. Now you have e-cigarettes, you have hookah, which is very popular, and a lot of bars and so are promoting it. You even have hookah bars here. Tell us a little bit about hookah. Is it safer? Because most people believe that, okay, it's harmless. We're just engaging in a little recreational fun. Tell us a little bit about the dangers that's attached to smoking or engaging in that kind of smoking.
Right. So this is a very common misconception that hookah is not dangerous. And although many users think it's less harmful, studies have shown that hookah smoke contains many of the same harmful components found in cigarettes, such as nicotine, tar, and heavy metals. And so when you smoke a typical cigarette, usually it requires about 8 to 10 puffs. However, an hour-long session of smoking hookah involves about 100 to 200 puffs. So you're potentially exposing yourself to more smoke over a greater period. So basically that 1 hour session, you inhale about 100 to 200 times the amount of smoke that you would inhale from just a single cigarette. And you're also exposed to about 9 times the carbon monoxide and about 2 times the nicotine of a single cigarette.
Mhm. And do all hookah, the hookah, do they contain nicotine or tobacco products?
So not all of them contain tobacco, but most of them contain nicotine. And even the ones that say they don't contain nicotine, when research was done, they have found traces of nicotine in those non-nicotine products.
And tell us about the damage of nicotine and tobacco itself. When you touched on it earlier, but in terms of in the hookah, in the context of using hookah.
Right. So again, hookah basically contains many of the same components as a traditional cigarette. But because of the way the hookah is used, persons who smoke it, they absorb more of the toxic substances also found in cigarettes than persons who smoke cigarettes do. And the shisha or hookah, it actually contains very high levels of nicotine. And as we know, nicotine is that addictive substance in cigarettes, and it can have lasting damaging effects on brain development. It's also linked to many of the same adverse effects as cigarette smoke, such as lung, bladder, and oral cancers and heart disease, as I mentioned earlier. You can have acute effects. So even if you say, look, I'm just doing it occasionally, every other weekend, you're still going to be exposed to the risks.
Okay. And in terms of the addictive, because if you're saying, okay, I'm just doing this occasionally, people won't see that as being addictive, but can people get hooked on it? Have you seen cases where people are hooked on smoking this thing?
So definitely studies have shown this because, again, it has way more nicotine than the traditional cigarettes, and nicotine is that component of cigarette that makes it addictive. Additionally, you have short-term effects associated with the hookah. So you might see increased heart rate, increased blood pressure, you might have reduced lung function, and also carbon monoxide intoxication.
Mhm. And we know when you're doing hookah smoking, or what do you call it, shisha, you have to use pipes. And in the
Right.
context of what's going on right now, I mean, COVID-19 is coming to a little lull now, but we still have to be careful. And you see people are using it use like you're sharing this instrument to smoke. What are some of the other health risks that you're exposed to besides COVID here?
Right. So the hookah device itself has a few different parts. So you have the hose, you have the stem, and you have the water. And all of these are potential sources of pathogens. And a number of studies have suggested that hookah smoking can pose the risk of transmitting infectious microorganisms such as your respiratory viruses, bacteria, fungi, and even TB. So this transmission is facilitated by the shared use. Many persons share the mouthpiece and even other parts of the device that is handled by everyone. So you potentially have hand to mouth contact as well. And also studies have shown that these hookahs, they're not cleaned very regularly because washing and cleaning them is very difficult and labor intensive and additionally time consuming. So this can also facilitate the transmission of various diseases. A study done in the US, actually, they sampled some devices and all of them showed bacterial growth, with the mouthpieces having the highest bacterial load.
And so you can get a lot of other diseases besides lung damage, besides what smoking can do to you. You have other things. And then COVID, and I believe that would expose you to COVID as well, because people, it's their mouth and and all kind of things.
Right, and they're also in close contact. Persons are going to take off their masks to use it, so definitely you're at risk.
Mm. And what about secondhand smoke? I know with regular smoking, cigarette people, we've been warned about secondhand smoke and the dangers of that. But in terms of hookah, what does that do to persons in the same environment? Because it's a lot of smoke. We must
Right.
Go ahead.
Very similar to cigarette because you're exhaling the smoke, so the smoke contains all these same harmful chemicals. So anybody that is around you is going to be exposed to that smoke, and the same poses the same health risk to those persons.
And there are certain products, they call them the end and ends products. So it's ENDS and ENNDS. Can you explain to us what those products are and how they tie into the use of hookah and other new methods of smoking?
Right, so the ENDS would be the electronic nicotine delivery system, and the ENNDS would be the electronic non-nicotine delivery system. These also go by different names. So you have vapes, vaporizers, vape pens, hookah pens, e-cigarettes, e-pipes, e-cigarettes. They're all terms used to describe your ends. And what these products do is that they use an e-liquid. They usually contains nicotine derived from the tobacco. And they also have additional flavorings. And the liquid is heated to create an aerosol that the user inhales. Now, these may be manufactured to look like conventional cigarettes. However, some of them resemble the USB flash drives, pens, and some of them bear basically no resemblance to cigarettes. And they additionally have reusable parts. And some of them may be disposable, and they just use them once and then they're thrown away.
And so with this new method of smoking, like with the e-stuff, we find a lot of young people engaging in them. Is that true?
Yeah, definitely.
Good. And because they look like pens and so on, they're easy to, like, you can easily camouflage them with your notebook, take them into schools and so on. So I believe you can say parents need to be careful in terms of looking at what these new methods are, because they have to be more vigilant, because they have you said USB, they flash.
Yeah, they can look like USBs, even pens.
So it's like young people could be smoking right and have devices right in front of you. You wouldn't know because
right.
It looks just like a harmless pen. We'll just take a short break, and then when we come back, we'll talk about the e-cigarettes.
Sure.
Welcome back to the program. I'm your host, Rehanna Ramsay, and you're listening to Your Health Matters. Dr. Shaliza Gopi from the Tobacco Unit at the Ministry of Health is here with us, and she's talking to us about hookah and other new methods of smoking. And she's touching on the dangers of those new methods and new devices. We spoke at length about hookah earlier in the program, and now we're going to go into e-cigarettes, something that is being used widely by many persons. Some persons use it as a method of helping them to come off, to wean them off of the regular traditional cigarettes. But Dr. Gopi is going to tell us if that is, if that is recommended as a medical person, if that is something that you would recommend persons going to use instead of the actual cigarettes. Go ahead, Dr. Gopi.
Okay, so it's controversial and there have been mixed reviews. There haven't been a lot of studies on this. What they tend to say is that, oh, the e-cigarettes, they contain fewer chemicals, therefore they might be less harmful, but they're not exactly healthy because e-cigarettes, they contain dangerous chemicals, and these chemicals can injure the lungs. And it's actually, the vapor is very similar to secondhand smoke from traditional cigarettes. And so it can harm bystanders, including pregnant women. And so a study was done in 2019, And it showed that 19% of participants who used the e-cigarettes to quit, they were no longer smoking by a year later, while those that used the nicotine replacement therapy had a quit smoking rate of 9%. However, among the e-cigarettes users, 80% of them were still vaping a year later, compared to only 9% of the people in the nicotine replacement group. So while they're very convenient, they're allowed indoors, this might make it difficult for smokers to resist them. However, as said before, they're not very healthy.
Not completely healthy, so it's still a risk.
Definitely.
We touched on a lot of things about hookah earlier. You talked about secondhand smoke and the amount of smoke in an hour, the amount of damage just pulling at that pipe within 1 hour can do to you, as opposed to using a pack of cigarettes a day. It's even more dangerous because of the duration of the time that you inhale that amount of smoke too. You touched on that, but there are some other risks. Can you talk about the other risks? You touched on something about combustion. Can you tell us about those other risks with smoking using these methods of and these devices to engage in smoking?
Right. So these electronic delivery systems, they've actually been linked to a number of physical injuries, including burns from explosion or malfunction, because some of the products, they don't meet the expected standards, or some of them are tampered with by users. And you can also have accidental exposure of children to these devices. And the e-liquid, they pose serious risk because it can leak out, or children may actually swallow the poisonous liquid. So these are very serious risks that we have to consider when using these devices.
Let's go back a little bit to the vaping. What is that? Because when people hear vaping, they think smoking is just like you inhale and you exhale, but I think it's a little bit different. And can you say what's the impact that specifically has on your body?
Right, so the vape pens are very similar to the e-cigarettes, and they all contain emissions, and these emissions typically contain nicotine and other substances that are not only harmful to the users, but also the non-users that are exposed to these aerosols. So some of them, as I mentioned before, they claim to be nicotine-free, but they have been found to contain nicotine. And consumption of nicotine in children, especially in adults, they have very serious impacts on brain development, and they can lead to long-term consequences and potentially leading to learning and anxiety disorders.
And so go ahead.
So evidence actually showed that persons who have never smoked before and they are exposed to these electronic devices, or if they use them, it can double their chance of starting to smoke cigarettes later on in life.
So my next question to you, Dr. Gopi, is, does e-cigarettes and vaping expose persons to the same amount of secondhand inhalation as the traditional cigarettes?
Right, so studies show that it might actually expose you to more because, again, they have longer session, more puffs. So when they did the study, they showed that the hazardous levels of home air pollution in where persons were smoking hookah was greater than in a cigarette smoking home. So this raises a lot of concerns about the negative health impacts on individuals living in homes or just being in a surrounding where hookah is being smoked. For example, even workers in a bar that persons are smoking, they might not smoke hookah, but they're working there, so they're exposed to this higher level of smoke.
And in terms of the environment, what's the impact that these e-cigarettes and vaping would have? Because as you said, if it's more smoke in a regular setting, I can imagine what damage it does to the environment.
Right, so for the environment, the e-cigarette waste is actually more serious to the environment than the cigarette butts, because with the e-cigarettes, they introduce plastic into the environment, as well as the lithium ion batteries. This gets into the waterway. And unlike the cigarette butts, these products are not going to biodegrade. So they're left on the streets and they'll eventually break down into microplastics and chemicals, and that's going to flow into our waterways and cause pollution.
And if somebody wants to quit smoking, what are some of the ways that you would say, because you mentioned that vaping and e-cigarettes are not really recommended. They might seem less harmful, but it still has a risk. So what are some ways locally available to persons to quit smoking?
So we have nicotine and non-nicotine replacement therapies, and these include the nicotine gum, which is quite popular. I think a lot of persons know about the nicotine gum and the nicotine patch. Those are the most popular ones. There are also drugs, but this would have to be dispensed by a doctor. And while they might not be available right now in our public system, I know that they are available in the private pharmacies.
Mm-hmm. And when it comes to persons garnering more information on these types of the impact of smoking, the impact of using hookah and e-cigarettes, is the ministry or is your unit engaged in any public information, disseminating any public information, or do they have to contact you to get that information? Are you involved in any campaign to expose people to what they're engaging in?
Right, so actually quite recently, we celebrated World No Tobacco Day on the 31st of May, and we had a big campaign out on the Main Street Avenue, and we were able to reach a lot of persons, particularly school children. A lot of them visited, and we did a lot of educational talks. I should mention that most of the kids knew what a hookah was. They knew about all these devices. Yeah. Most of them said they weren't involved in using them, but they did know about it. So we do events like that. We go out into the regions. Recently, we went to Fort Morant, and we have a lot of sensitization on hookah, and not only hookah, but also about the law regarding smoking and using these devices. Additionally, I would recommend to all persons who are smoking that they should check out there's a department at the Georgetown Public Hospital, a spirometry clinic, where you can get a lung function test done just to see how the lung is functioning. And they also do counseling on tobacco cessation.
And you mentioned that you don't ever gradually come off tobacco, you just have to quit.
Right, so you don't go from 20 cigarettes to 10 and then to 5. You have to quit completely to see all the benefits. And it's definitely hard, but once you're working with someone that can help you, and what we recommend is that if you're quitting, don't take it on by yourself. Tell a friend, tell your family, tell someone that's going to hold you accountable. And if you smoke a cigarette, if you slip up, it's not the end, right? You just get back on it, get back on track, and make sure you have that person that's going to motivate you, encourage you, hold you accountable.
And when it comes to hookah and e-cigarettes, are the same principles applied, or do you need some special sets of guidelines to help persons quit?
No, it would be the same. We do motivational interviewing, and we help guide you along the path on quitting.
And how can persons, let's say they want to reach out to you, do you have an email address or something that somebody could reach out to you to get some information they want on hookah or NCDs, because you were the NCD unit, which is the non-communicable disease unit, and that is connected to using tobacco, a lot of tobacco and smoking and stuff. How do they get on to you?
Right, so we're at the Chronic Diseases Unit on Camp and Charlotte Street, and the number you can call to reach us is 223-7355.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Gopi. It's nice having you on the program, and that brings us to the end of our show today.
Thank you, Rehanna.
Just telling our listeners to stay tuned to Kaieteur Radio. Until next time, have a good rest of the week. Bye-bye.
Guyana from coast to coast.
Demerara and Essequibo 99.1 FM.
Herbie's